Anybody got a testimony they want to share before I get started? God do something cool for anybody here this week? No? All right, cool. Turn to Ephesians chapter 6. I'm going to read you verses 10 to 22. It's not all I'm going to preach on, but that's where I'm going to really land. Work for everybody? Perfect. So we'll start this off. It says this, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So, now I gotta jump down because I separated it. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, so that you may be able to withstand on that evil day, and having done everything to stand firm, stand therefore and fasten the belt of truth around your waist, and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As shoes for your feet, put on whatever will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all of these, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray in the Spirit at all times, in every prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert and always persevere in supplication for all the saints. Pray also for me, so that when I speak, a message may be given to me to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it boldly, as I must speak. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's been a couple of months since I was here. I was here after Sean and I and Chris and a couple other people went to Poland, before I took a couple of 15-year-olds back to Poland. Now, if you want to get yourself in trouble with your local parents association, tell your 15-year-old and his best friend you're going to take them to Poland to build shelter for refugees. I got so many phone calls. What kind of parent are you? A good one, I think. Those two young men worked like dogs for 14 days. They were ready to start working at 6 o'clock in the morning, and were mad when people told them they needed to stop at 6 o'clock in the evening. And for the bulk of those days, they took ceramic tiles, clay tiles off of a roof, and cleaned all of the cement off them and piled them neatly so that they could be reused. Can you imagine being passionate about cleaning tiles in 35-degree heat for 10 days? It blew my mind. Those kids were amazing. While they were in Poland, I left them. I went into the Ukraine, right? And we got to spend a week with some people that Sean and I both know, who we've grown to love over the years. In my rush, because I preached in Poland that Sunday morning, and then I had to drive 3 hours to get to the train to get to Krakow, Poland, to go into the Ukraine. And I always travel in Crocs, because why not? And I forgot to pack my shoes. And if you're going into an actual war zone, you may need to run. You might need some running shoes. So I said to the house where I'm staying, I said to the leader, I said, hey, I need to go get some shoes. And Lviv is a big city. It's got a nice mall. And so we went to the mall and I bought shoes. And this has happened before. I forgot dress shoes or stuff like that, and I always give them away at the end. And Vladia, my pastor friend, says, hey, when you leave, can I have your shoes? That's never happened before. None of the leadership has ever. And I said, I don't think my shoes will fit you. I said, but what's going on? And when they left Mariupol, right, the van showed up full of supplies. They unloaded the van, and they put 15 people in the van, and it left for Lviv. There was no packing. There was no deciding. There was none of that stuff. And so in the house where I'm staying, there's 11 people, and all 11 people, none of them have good shoes. Now, you got to understand, this is a little more complicated that because as soon as they got to Lviv, the very first thing these people did was start mission work. They went to the orphanage, the single mom house, refugee center, and they went to these other refugee centers, and they started doing all of this stuff. And how do you preach the gospel with no good shoes? And I said, well, I guess we're going to go to the mall. We're going to go to the mall. We're going to buy shoes. Go in, and they're like, can you afford this? I'm like, nah, I don't think so, but I got a really good credit rating. Right? So I put $1,500 worth of shoes on, all in. I think I put about $4,000 on my credit card on that trip. And here's the reality, and I'll get to it later. There's still that $4,000 sitting on my credit card. And it's sitting on my credit card because I don't make a ton of money. I can't pay it off all at the same time, but I'm okay with it sitting there because it's not that I could afford to do it, it's that I couldn't afford not to. I want that to sink in for a second. Because we've created this society, this world where we balance everything off of our convenience. And we ask ourselves every day, can I afford to do this? And the question, I believe, according to the Bible, we should actually be asking ourselves is, can I afford not to? But we've created not just a church, we've created a society that doesn't know how to wrestle. We know how to fight, but we don't know how to wrestle. Okay, so I'm gonna launch about 4 different trains, maybe only 3, heading in the same direction. And for most of this, you guys are gonna be like, what is going on? And then at the end, when you watch them all explode, you're gonna be like, okay, this is weird. So if we jump all the way back to Genesis, well, how much time do I have? What time do I need to be done? Oh, I like that answer, but I always get in trouble when I do that. Here's Genesis 1:28. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. And have dominion over the fish in the sea and over the birds of the air and over every little thing that moves upon the earth. So my daughter comes home the other day. She's got a new boyfriend. My daughter is brilliant. She's 17. She's feisty. I almost bought this little plaque from the mall the other day. It said, she saw, she thought she could, so she did, and now she's in timeout. That's my daughter, okay? And as a pastor, my wife and I are both pastors. As pastors, there's this indication that your kids should come to church. And I said, when Heidi and I were first married, we said we were never gonna force our kids to do anything they didn't want to do. And when my daughter was about 14, she came and said, guys, I don't want to go to church. And I said, okay. We go to church. So if you don't tell me by Saturday morning you're not coming, then you have to come to church. That's the rule. She said, okay. Cool, and in all of this, it's always in your head, is my daughter saved? Is the blah, 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 all of this other stuff. And the reality is this, my daughter is passionately in love with Jesus. She's just passionately bored to death with this thing we call church. Okay? That's just the fact. She's passionately in love with the Father. She loves Jesus. She loves people. The one thing is an empathetic parent. The one thing that I prayed for was that my kids would be empathetic, and all three of my children are amazing, who they just gather everyone around them and love, and it's amazing. But my daughter has this boyfriend, and I was telling my friends about this boyfriend because she comes home and she's like, he works, and he has a car, and he's going to the university in the fall, and he's gonna be a nurse, and he thinks Star Wars is better than Star Trek, and my buddy's like, wait, what? And I looked at him, he's like, Star Wars is not better than Star Trek. And I'm like, dude, you're hearing the story you want to hear, not the one that's being told. So here's what I need you all to do. Hear the story that's being told. Because I'm going to say some things that challenge the way we think about things. And I need you to hear the story that's being told. Okay? Everybody good with that? Okay, before I go any further, because it's in my brain right now, I want to thank Carrie Ann and Angela. When I first, that whole thing started, Angela was the person I wanted to sing. When I got here, she wasn't on the worship team. And Carrie Ann was leading, and so we messaged Carrie Ann and we said, hey, and the song that I thought we should, at that point thought we should do was different. And so we messaged Carrie Ann and said, hey, can you do this song? She said, no, I don't know it. And I'm working all day, so I'll try to learn it. And I said, well, would you be okay if Angela did it? And she said, yeah, I'd be fine. And we messaged Angela. Angela said, hey, yeah. And I was like, so you only have to do this song, and then you can leave, or you can stay up on stage. And the fear becomes when you have two really strong leaders in one place at one time, it's really easy for there to be a power struggle over leadership. And there wasn't. That was such an amazing worship time. You sounded amazing, and you could just feel the presence. And I believe that you guys both need to get ready to really grow in what God is calling you into, because if you can be that submitted to each other and to the rest of the people on the stage and to the congregation, and nothing is off the table. Okay? Cool. Okay, now back to what I'm talking about. So, the very first commandment that God gives to humanity, be fruitful and multiply. We've done that. Because it's kind of easy. Right? Like, let's be real, most of us are adults here. The being fruitful part is okay. Right? The second commandment that he gives is to subdue. Anybody here ever subdued anything? Guess what it is? Wrestling. Not fighting, wrestling, because you actually have to grab it and you have to tussle and you have to subdue. That's it. Those are the two things that God has called us to do. Be fruitful and multiply, and subdue. And all of a sudden the serpent comes. And guess what we didn't do? Subdue. We didn't. They exchanged a couple of words. Adam is standing right beside Eve, and Eve is the one talking to the serpent. Now, there's a whole bunch of different messages you could preach off of that. None of them would be accurate, but you could do it. But regardless, Eve is there, and she's saying stuff, and Adam's there, and I have to believe that he's wrestling with himself, and And they have a little bit, and then all of a sudden they start listening to the serpent, and the serpent tells them about the wonders of this tree and how it's actually gonna be good for them. And here's the problem, this is where everything went sideways according to me, is they chose what was easy over what was hard. And because they chose what was easy over what was hard, the easy led to hard. And in life, when we're gonna touch points on a couple of these things, where we realize that when we start with what's easy, it generally ends in what's difficult. And when we start with what's difficult or hard, it very quickly goes to what's easy. Are y'all following me? Because there's this wrestling match that we need to learn how to do. And we've created a society that we want to be right more than we want to be righteous. We want to be in control more than we want to be in chaos. And we want to rise more than we want to elevate. Let that one sink in for a second. Because I appreciate so much when Angela, during that first song, when she said, listen, there's a way to fall in love with awkward. And I would hazard to say that we need to learn to fall in love with awkward. The most life-changing prayer I ever prayed was in a hospital waiting room in Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta, when they keep coming and telling me my oldest son is gonna die and this is all happening and all the blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, and it's chaos and it's crazy, but I have to be in that moment. And I pray, God, make me comfortable in uncomfortable places. All right? Make me comfortable in uncomfortable places. I'm gonna tell you, I do awkward really well. I was 25 meters from the Russian army in 2019, sipping tea. People are like, weren't you freaking out? No, it was actually one of the most peaceful experiences of my entire life. It was weird. I do awkward really well. The reason I do awkward really well is because I've learned how to wrestle my entire life. Sean and I were talking about this weekend. I met Jesus before I ever met church. And because I met Jesus before I ever met church, I knew him more than I knew the church, which meant I didn't know your rules. And when I was like really passionate about this crazy thing called faith, I had a pastor pray for me and he prayed, Dwayne, I pray you never prioritize the rules. I was like, okay. So now when I break the rules, it doesn't bother me because, yeah, there's grace and you have to forgive me. But we've created this world where our stance tends to be, we're right. Because Jesus said, they'll know the truth and the truth will make them free. We know Jesus, that means we know the truth. We have the truth, we're right. And we're willing to be wrong to prove it. And again, I said things that are, I'm gonna warn you guys right now, I'm gonna say some things and to make some of you mad. And I'm not saying things to make you mad because I like controversy or because I'm saying things to make you mad because I'm hoping that you will come and wrestle, or you will look at the people around you and you will start to wrestle with them, because in that ability to wrestle, we create tension. And tension centers. If you're taking notes, you're gonna wanna write that down because it's probably one of the most important things that this world has forgotten. Tension centers. I traveled with the circus for 10 years because they kicked me out of Bible college twice. If you've been here before, you've heard that story. I'm not getting into it. But when you learn how to do things in the circus, the very first thing you understand is tension. Because everything has to be tied off in certain ways to make sure everything's tense. Because if it's not tense when that poor dude's walking across the wire, it does not go well for him. Tension centers. But tension is uncomfortable, and tension is awkward, and tension causes controversy. And so we'd rather be right and surround ourselves with the people who tell us we're right and affirm all of our thought processes and everything else. And then we're upset that we've landed so far right or so far left. And we don't understand why other people aren't looking at us the way they used to look at us. Because we stopped having tension, we stopped wrestling, we stopped contending, and we just started failing. And the reason I say we just started failing is because it's funny. 3 times this past week, I've had somebody come to me and talk to me about a religious spirit. And I said, do you realize that's named wrong? And they said, no. I said, oh, yes. Well, how do you know it's named wrong? I said, because the word religion is mentioned twice in the entire Bible in one place, and that place is in James when it says this: what is pure and undefiled religion that the Lord requires?
Look after orphans and widows in their distress. Keep oneself unspotted.
How is that bad? Listen, if you're not religious, we have a problem. The problem isn't the people were religious. The problem is that people were more concerned about being right than they were about being righteous. And this thing has gotten so far out of hand that the Gospel Coalition released a statement saying that social justice and the gospel are not intrinsically entwined, meaning that you don't have to pursue social justice to preach the gospel. And my head wanted to... Let's just let that hover for a second. Because when we start coming up with all the reasons why people deserve to be where they are, we stopped wrestling with what Jesus called us to do. When we start validating excess and we celebrate the people who are exceeding the most as good and godly and demean the people who are struggling the most, we stopped wrestling. Because I don't have a problem with people having money. I don't have a problem with people being wealthy. I don't have a problem with any of that. The problem that I have is, what is it for? A friend of mine had several restaurants. Actually, I've had a couple of friends like this. But this one friend, in one day, sold everything, $79 million in the bank. Now, I don't think that guy still has the first dollar he ever made, but I guarantee he picked it out in a lineup. For years, he was the most generous tightwad I ever met. It's funny because I actually say this stuff to him. And so I'm at his house and we're having this heated conversation. And I'm like, dude, what are you gonna do with it? Well, and he's like, well, I need to live. Well, what about, oh yeah, I'd love to help you. love to help you with your trip to the Ukraine. Here's $1,000. He says, I'd love to give you more, I just can't. If you say you can't afford, I'll slap you. Now, I don't care how, it's not about how much he gave, it's the heart behind it. And it's the wrestling with that, right? And we came up with all of the tricks to validate. It's funny because, there's that verse, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so we say, well, the eye of the needle is this doorway on the side of, except for it wasn't. He was talking about the eye of a needle. And we offset it. And no, don't hear me. I'm not saying everybody empty your savings account. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is take your savings account and hold it up against the gospel and say, Jesus, whatever it is you want me to do with this, I'm gonna do. Because I have another friend who sold a bunch of stuff and he started a construction company. And off of that construction company, all of the profit of that construction company goes into building houses for Habitat for Humanity. And he's like, listen, I have enough money. I don't have, but this is the thing that I'm passionate about. This is the thing that I see God doing. And so this is what I'm gonna do. And I said, that's fine. What about when your commitment doesn't line up with, and he said, I just take money out of my account and I'll put it in there and honor my commitment because this is gonna cost me something. So the very first thing we have to come back to in this understanding of wrestling with the world around us and wrestling with our faith and wrestling with our church and wrestling with everything else is this is gonna cost you something. It bothers me when I hear people say, oh, salvation is a free gift. It's not. It cost Jesus something. Going to the Ukraine, I raised the money to go to the Ukraine. It still costs me stuff. Coming up to the front for prayer costs you stuff. The question at this moment in time that we all need to be able to answer is, am I willing to pay what it's gonna cost? Is it a price that I'm willing to pay? So we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against rulers in high places. The head is the highest place in the human body, am I right? It's not backwards where the feet are the biggest, right? The head is the highest place. Subdue. We have to learn how to wrestle with our thoughts. Because whether we like it or not, one of those rulers of high places that the Bible is talking about is us. It's my brain. It's my head. It's my thought process. Don't come at me with your Christianese. Oh, I gave it all to Jesus. It's mine. And every day I surrender it. And every day I challenge it. And every day I call it out. And I call it out to the people around me. You can ask Sean. We've had some interesting conversations. Because we call it out. Chris and I have had some interesting conversations because we call it out. Because it happens, and it happened because I thought it was right, and now I have to come face to face with the fact that I was wrong, and I have to wrestle. But we've created such an easy society that it's instead of wrestling, I just say to you, I'm sorry. And because we've highlighted that forgiveness is like, you say, oh, I forgive you. It's not that easy. It's funny, I hear people all the time, oh, I forgave that person. The next day that person's not around, talking all kinds of smack. We forget that that word forgiveness literally means to return to the moment before. Right? Well, that's literally what it means. When I say, hey, I forgive you, right? When I say that, it means that I'm going to return to the second before it happened, and I'm going to live where a relationship returns to the place like it never happened. And as a person that endured all kinds of different abuses as a child, I'm going to tell you that there are things in my life that I have not been able to get there on. There are things that I have, and there's things that I haven't. And so to believe right away that this is going to be instantaneously and as soon as is crazy. There's a wrestling that goes with it. Sean and I talked this morning. Every day I get up and God brings to my mind those things that I'm wrestling with to forgive. And I get out my hammer and a chisel and I start knocking away. And I'm not sure, as a pastor, as a minister, as a Christian, as a human being, I'm not sure that all of the things that I haven't been able to forgive, I'm going to be able to forgive before I go in a box. I'm not sure, but the one thing that I know is God is more interested in my heart to pursue forgiveness than he is in some just cheesy words that don't really mean anything. Because it's easy. It's easy for me to say, I'm sorry. It's not easy for me to make amends. It's easy for me to say, I forgive you. It's not easy for me to actually put in the work and release. It's easy. And what easy becomes complicated, and what's complicated becomes easy. I am proud. I am proud that I am the community chaplain for the Lethbridge Christian Tabernacle. I am proud that my wife is the family life pastor for that church. I'm proud that Frank Allen is the senior or lead pastor. I'm proud that we have another guy named Josh Oldenberger who came to us right around the beginning of COVID. And he said, I really believe that God is calling the tab into social media. And we're all like, we have no idea how to do that. And he's like, don't worry, I will do your TikTok, I'll do your Instagram, I'll do your Facebook, I'll do everything. So approximately the beginning of 2020, we started this, and as of this morning when I looked, 1.9 million followers across all our social media platforms. And here's how we, don't applaud to that, applaud to this. Here's how we got there. We're not all friends. We wrestle. Right? We say things out loud, knowing they will frustrate the other people in the room. And then we wrestle. And we do not give you permission to use cheesy Christianese to get out of the wrestle. The Billy Graham Evangelical Association did a thing in Calgary for pastors. And I'm not meaning to throw stones. I'm just going to, okay? And in that, they said, we've suffered persecution through COVID because they wanted to do some meetings in England, and England had some really strict regulations. And so they were told no, and they're like, and we were persecuted, but we weren't going to take it. I was like, that's not what that word means. And so the person that was there, my friend, she's an old lady, and she says to me, she says, wow, you don't know the circumstance. I said, wow, I know the meaning of the word. She says, wow, maybe we don't need to discuss this. Wow, maybe we do. You don't get to not wrestle. You don't get to say, here's my other favorite one. We'll just have to agree to disagree. Do you realize when you say that, what you're saying is I'm right and you're an idiot? And trust me, I get myself into some really fun conversations, and in each one, I really want to say, whoa, let's agree to disagree. And instead, what I say is, please tell me more. What? Tell me more. Talk to me. Why do you think this is okay? I'm talking to this lady, and she's about 2 months pregnant. She's like, I'm going to have an abortion. This was last week. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, and I know you have no idea. So here's what I'm going to ask you. Why? She said, what? I said, why do you think this is your only option? I'm not going to be so judgmental and so presumptuous to believe that you just all of a sudden found out you're pregnant and said, well, I'm going to kill it. I don't believe that at all. I don't. I said, so why? Why do you? And she gave me the list. And she had a long, very, very valuable list of information of things that were going on in her life. And I said, okay. I said, can I put you in touch with some people who are able to journey with this with you? I promise none of them are going to tell you you can't. And I put them in love with the Pregnancy Care Center in Lethbridge, and they're working. She's still not convinced she's not having it. But they're wrestling. Because they decided that it wasn't just because they thought they were right, didn't mean they were. And then there was, I wash windows for a friend of mine. I don't do residential windows, so don't trap me in the lobby, okay? But my friend, who has been a longtime friend and supporter and an encourager, said, hey, do you want to do my windows? I said, sure, I'll do your windows. And so I do windows, and I met this guy, and he's like, I'm a Christian businessman. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, and I opened a pizza restaurant. I said, oh, here we go. He said, now I'm just trying to figure out how to make it a Christian business. And I said, well, okay, you can't. And he said, why? I said, because your business has no soul. It's the same reason Canada will never be a Christian nation. It has no soul. We don't have a Christian nation. We have Christians in a nation. And the sooner we grab hold of that, the sooner we're actually going to effectively change our nation, because it's no longer about us telling us, see, we're right. This is a Christian nation and it's got to do like Christians do. No, we are Christians in a nation. And as Christians in this nation, we need to start to live like Christians to impact our nation. And so when we just all of a sudden start telling people what they can and can't do, we make ourselves look stupid. And so the Bible is really clear. Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And so the very first thing as Christians we need to do is stop grumbling about paying our taxes. Jesus told us to pay your taxes. It's fine. If you want to have a wrestling match about that afterwards, feel free. We'll do it. But I'm going to tell you the other part of that is I no longer, once I give my money, once I pay my taxes, I no longer have the right to tell the government how to spend its money. Let that one sink in for a second. My boss, when they pay me, they don't have the right to tell me how to spend my money. It's mine. I'm going to do what I believe I'm supposed to do. Can we agree with that? Does that make sense? And so here's how we start to actually influence our government and influence the way it spends its money, by spending our money the way we think the government needs to spend its money. See, that's a little hard when we say, listen, we don't want the government to fund abortions, but we're not willing to put up any money to help with childcare, help with food, help with clothing, help with this, right? We want the government to pay for everything. We want it to cost us nothing, and then we wonder why nobody listens to us. I'm not meaning to lump everybody. I'm just saying, as a generalization, this is what happens. And so we all come into the place where we come in and we start to say, hey, listen, and now we got to come back to the place where we're willing to say, listen, let's wrestle. I don't need to fight you. I don't need to knock you out. I don't need to prove. I need to actually contend with it, because that contention builds tension, and tension brings us back to center. And I get excited when Sean's like, yeah, we're talking about how do we have a healthy church, and how do we impact our community, and how do we do all of this stuff. And I'm like, dude, I have a word for your church, and it's simply this: learn how to wrestle. Stop fighting. Start wrestling. Because in the ability to learn how to wrestle, my wife is texting me. In the ability to learn how to wrestle, we get attention. And people start watching and people start paying attention. And it's no longer us just being right, it's us actually getting into the community. And instead of telling people, I had a meeting with the mayor of Lethbridge 3 weeks ago, went exactly as I thought it was, because we have this huge homeless problem. And I'm like, and I've done social justice around the planet for 20 years. I'm pretty good at this game. And I said, listen, here's the things that we should do. He's like, oh, we're gonna do all of that. We're gonna do it over here at the shelter. And I said, here's my problem. And he said, what? I said, did you ask anybody if that's where they wanted it? He said, well, all the business people aren't the problem. Did you ask the street people, the thing that this is actually for, if this is where it's gonna be the best thing for them to help them? He said, well, no, they will go where we tell them. That's the problem. You're not treating them like they're human, you're treating them like they're, and it's funny because we call them homeless, addicts, right? We want a sober shelter, we want this, we have all kinds of titles, and not one of those titles says person. And when we stop that and we start looking and saying, hey, that's a person, and as a person in this nation, they have rights and they have freedoms and they have obligations and they have an ability. And so as that, we need to come and connect with them. And we don't need to connect with them out of obligation or duty because we read James. We need to connect with them because we just passionately fell in love with them. And how did we manage to passionately fell in love with them? Because we passionately fell in love with Jesus. And the more I fall in love with Jesus, the more I fall in love with the world around me. Because that's the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment, love the Lord thy God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Second, equal to the first, love your neighbor as yourself. How do I love my neighbor as myself when I don't even understand what that crap is? And so I sit down and I say, hey, Dad, teach me to let you love me. And I'm gonna tell you, and I know the last time I preached, I said this exact same thing. I don't know who did it, but if you every day for 10 minutes say, hey, God, teach me to let you love me. I'm just gonna sit here in this moment, teach me to let, you're gonna wrestle. It's gonna be awkward and it's gonna be uncomfortable and it's gonna be weird. And at the end of it, you're gonna realize that you have no idea what's going on, but it's good. And so we wrestle. And you get accustomed to wrestling. The old school way in the original Olympics, they all wrestled naked. That would have been awkward to watch. I'm glad that that stuff was done before internet. Like the sports, the evening sports broadcast would be weird at that point in time. But they did, they learned how to wrestle. And here's the thing is it's funny because it tells you to start wrestling before it tells you to put on the armor. And if you need to get good at fighting with armor on, here's how you do it. I'm gonna tell you, you wrestle and you put on one piece and you learn how to wrestle with that one piece. You put on another piece, you learn how to fight with that one piece, you put on another piece. That's how you're able to wrestle because the wrestling never stops. Right? Every time I think I've gotten someplace, I give myself a new stupid idea that I think is brilliant. And so we put on the armor and we put on that belt of truth. But don't be so presumptuous as to think that you understand the entirety of truth. So we're just putting on the truth that we know, knowing that that's going to change. Right? When I first became a Christian, I believed the truth was the Holy Spirit is a gentleman. He won't make you do anything you don't want to do. And then I went through some stuff in my life and I believe the Holy Spirit's not a gentleman. He will make you do things you don't want to do. Both statements were true. And then now I'm at the place in my life, the Holy Spirit is a gentleman. He won't make you do anything you don't want to do. He's just got brilliant ways to convince you. You don't want to go to Nineveh? No problem. Get in the fish. You don't want to be quiet? No problem. Talk to the donkey. They're all true. But I don't get to be so presumptuous to tell you that my truth is more true than yours. Which is why Sean and I get along so well, is because we're okay saying, yeah, I don't agree with that. Okay, let's talk. Let's talk. Let's not fight. It's not a shut down thing. It's just, let's talk. And so we put on that belt of truth and we grow into it. And then we put on that breastplate of righteousness. Here's the funny thing about the breastplate. That's what everybody sees. Some of us are wearing the breastplate of condescension. Some of us are wearing the breastplate of judgment. There's this thing happens in church circles, especially in mission outreaches. You can't give street people money because they'll buy drugs. Right? Well, how do you know? Well, no, that's what you assume. You assume they're gonna buy drugs. So you can't be, oh, you gotta buy them food. So I'm walking down the street and there's this girl passed out. It's about 38 degrees outside and she's in the sun, passed out cold. And so I wake her up to make sure she's okay, making sure I don't need to call an ambulance, and there it is. And now I'm like, what do you need? She's like, I need food. And I'm supposed to say to this girl, I'm a rather large, freaky looking dude, and I'm supposed to say to this tiny girl I've never met, well, you come with me and I will feed you. I said, okay, how do I help you? She said, I need money. I said, okay, I'll give you everything I have on me right now. And then I'm praying that I was right. I only had $20. Not that I wouldn't have given her 100. I just wanted to spend that money on something else, I guess. I don't know. But I had $20 and I gave it to her. I said, do me one favor. She said, what? I said, buy water. Whatever else you do, it's now your money. Okay. That's how we start to put on that breastplate of righteousness. Is we don't do what's right for us, or we don't do what's right now. We do what's right for the Father. Does that make sense? Because against love, there is no law. Against love, there is no defense. There's two things that you can't stop: money and love. Right? You can stop credit, you can stop, right? You can't stop cash and you can't stop love. That's just the fact. So just love, and that's what your breastplate of righteousness looks like. And then the New Revised Standard Version, which I love, says this. It says, put on the right shoes to preach the gospel. And for far too long, we've been telling everybody that these are the shoes you have to wear. We still have our old 1800 military infantry boots that they didn't even have a left or right. They just had one boot, right? Bad for your feet, and they don't really take you anywhere. No, you put on the shoes that are right for you, for where God is sending you. My buddy just moved to Papua New Guinea. When he left, guess what he did? Gave away all of his shoes and boots. Because a cold day there is 29 degrees Celsius. Flip-flops is the shoes you need to preach the gospel. That's why in Lviv, every person bought the shoes that they needed, because who am I to tell you how to preach the gospel? And the more you invite the Holy Spirit and the people around you to wrestle with each one of these things for you, the more impact you have. Here's the fun part about the armor of God is it's all defensive. None of it is offensive. You know what you don't find in there is a place where he says, now go attack. It doesn't say that. And the reason that's passionate to me is in my life I've been blessed. I'm gonna close with this and then we'll figure out what's gonna happen next. In my life I have been blessed to have two things happen to me. The audible voice of God and an open-eyed vision. And I'm standing outside of the building I was living in the parking lot. I was waiting for my ride. We're going to downtown Toronto to do some work with the street people and the prostitutes. And all of a sudden it was like this mist just came out of nowhere and hung right in front of me. And there was this mother and her child cowering. And there was a knight with a shield. And the shield was holding up, and there was this dragon breathing fire. And the fire was bouncing off of the shield, and on the shield was a hand with the nail hole in the middle, and blood was flowing down, and it was trickling backwards underneath this mother and child. But I looked, and I saw that the fact that the knight had his sword on the ground, he wasn't ready to attack. He was just ready to defend. And as a church, we've attacked enough. And again, I'm not speaking about any individual person as much as I'm addressing a global perspective. And now it's time for us to defend. It's time for us to comfort. It's time for us to clothe. And it's time for us to converse. It's time for us to start sitting with all those people. Let's be real, there's people in here that you've never really conversed with. You've talked to. Sometimes you've talked about. But now it's time to converse. Because that conversing promotes the wrestling and stops the fighting. So, hey, Dad, I don't know anything that you're doing in Hearts today. I don't know if this meant anything to anyone. But I'm going to close with this. To every good thing God is doing within you that we can't see, amen. To every good wrestling match that God is calling you into, amen. And to every incredibly difficult step out of where we've been and into where we're going, amen.